is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Atelia with tonight's top stories from East Asia. China's top diplomat Wang Yi heads to Europe to shore up ties and challenge U.S. influence even as Beijing faces EU backlash over trade disputes and its close ties to Russia. Now, Hong Kong marks 5 years since the national security law came into force as one of the city's last pro-democracy groups falls after nearly 2 decades. Rescue and relief efforts are underway across southern China after severe flooding from heavy rains. Floodwaters are receding, but authorities warn more rain is on the way. And China's manufacturing shrinks in June despite a truce in its trade war with the U.S. Poor business sentiment keeping up the pressure for more stimulus. Also in East Asia tonight, Starbucks to go. For good? Well, that just might be the case for its business in China, as the coffee chain giant faces increasingly stiff competition from lower-cost local rivals. China's top diplomat is on his way to Europe as Beijing seeks closer ties with the region as a counterweight to Washington. The European Union's headquarters in Brussels will be Wang Yi's first stop, where he will meet his counterpart, Kaja Kallas, for a high-level strategic dialogue. Mr. Wang will also be heading to France and Germany to meet his counterparts as well. Beijing and the EU have been grappling with deep frictions, including a trade deficit of more than $357 billion US. Both parties have also been imposing tit-for-tat tariffs, with the EU seeking to get tougher on what it describes as unfair economic practices by China. And as the clock ticks down to the deadline for US President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs on 9th of July, countries including EU members have been scrambling to make a deal with Washington. Well, Beijing has warned that its interests must not be used as bargaining chips, saying that it will not hesitate to adopt countermeasures to protect its interests. Now, for more, we are joined now by CNA's Tan Sihui in Beijing. Sihui, clearly a lot of hurdles between China and the EU, particularly in trade as well as the economy. So what then can we expect during Wang Yi's visit to Europe?
Well, lots to expect in his visit to Europe amid frictions with the U.S. Now, Wang Yi is likely to want to help China strengthen relations with the European Union, especially with key major players like Germany and France, to see if they're still open to business for key strategic areas. And increasingly so, as the European Union is becoming one of China's most important trading partners. So they are likely to want to solidify that relationship. And this comes as bilateral relationship and bilateral trade between both sides comes up to $780 billion US. Now, China's Foreign Affairs Ministry this afternoon, it did say that for this trip, it is hoping to and willing to work with the European side to have an open and cooperative dialogue and also to properly handle differences. And these differences have been very stark over the last few months and weeks, as we've seen European Union. They're likely to want to bring up the issue of overcapacity amid this tussle between U.S. and China. And so economists are also saying that the EU is likely to want to seek concessions with China. They're likely to possibly seek concessions to joint ventures in creating jobs for the EU as well as IP sharing. Now, economists are saying that China may not be able to meet these demands, but it will put in serious efforts to try to meet these demands by the EU, seeing how relationship between U.S. and China is at a very low point at this point. And so they are likely to want to meet concessions with the EU. Now, another separate issue that is likely to come up is the conflict in Ukraine. Now, the EU is likely to want to try to get China to convince and use its influence with Russia to convince Russia to stop its invasion in Ukraine. And this is despite China having a neutral stance all these years about the Ukraine conflict. But previously, China's Foreign Affairs Ministry had urged the EU and and China, as well as the rest of the world, to maintain peace and stability. And so these are likely the issues that will be talked between China's top diplomat and EU leaders. And this comes just days after US and China had finalized a trade deal framework, although not much information has been talked about. But this involves the loosening of export of rare earths to the US, as well as lifting of restrictions to China.
Hey, many thanks for that report. CNA's Tan Si-hui live from Beijing. It's been 5 years since Hong Kong adopted the national security law. Its provisions were first introduced in 2019 as a response to anti-government protests against a controversial extradition bill. Now, under the national security law, authorities have sweeping powers to clamp down on dissent. It criminalizes secession, subversion, terrorism, and collusion with foreign forces. Well, these 4 main crimes are punishable with a maximum sentence of life behind bars, and it applies to crimes committed within and outside Hong Kong. Well, there are other notable provisions, including sending some cases to be tried in the mainland, putting suspects under surveillance, or banning convicts from standing for public office. More than 300 people have been arrested under the law in the last 5 years. At least 14 news outlets, including Apple Daily, have closed. Human Rights Watch adds that nearly 100 civil society organizations, labor unions, and political parties have disbanded since the adoption of the national security law. Now, Hong Kong officials have defended law, saying that the city needs to prioritize security and make it part of its culture. In 2024, Hong Kong adopted the Safeguarding National Security Ordinance to augment the 2020 legislation. Well, it targets crimes such as sabotage, sedition, the theft of state secrets, and espionage. Now, Hong Kong's last active pro-democracy group is disbanding after 19 years amid what it calls immense political pressure from a national security crackdown. Hong Kong's League of Social Democrats said that the group had been left with no choice after considering the safety of party members. Now, the party is known for its more aggressive tactics. The LSD becomes the third major opposition party to shutter in Hong Kong in the past 2 years. In February, the Democratic Party, the city's largest opposition party, announced it would disband. And last year, the Civic Party dissolved. And as we've mentioned earlier, China imposed the national security law in 2020 after mass protests rocked the streets of Hong Kong. The law punishes offences like subversion with a possible life imprisonment. Then a second set of laws known as Article 23 was passed in 2024. Article 23 covered crimes such as sedition and treason. Earlier in June, China's top official on Hong Kong affairs, Xia Baolong, stressed that national security work must continue as hostile forces were still interfering in the city. While critics of the law often lament about the erosion of freedoms and autonomy, Mr. Xia said that the changes only targeted an extremely small number of people who severely endanger national security. Right, and we will be going deeper into political developments in Hong Kong a little later in the bulletin when we speak with international and independent China strategist Andrew Leung. Coming up next on East Asia Tonight, no respite for Japanese consumers. Prices of more than 2,000 food items expected to go up next month. And is Starbucks looking to exit China? CNA's Tan Yu-guan joins us to discuss the challenges faced by the American coffee chain. Hello again. You are watching East Asia Tonight, and it is now time for a business update with Roland Lim. So, Roland, tell us all about China's latest manufacturing figures, please.
Will do. China's factory ticked up for a second month in June, but remained in contraction territory as the temporary trade truce with the U.S. held, boosting overseas shipments. The official manufacturing PMI came in at 49.7 in June, edging up marginally from May. Remember, reading below 50 indicates contraction. The non-manufacturing gauge rose to 50.5 this month from 50.3 in May. Officials say China has seen the improvement of both production activities and market demand since mid-May. Greater China markets ending mixed following those figures. The Hang Seng Index down 0.9% nearly for the day, 24,072 points. Tech giants Tencent, Alibaba and EV makers leading the declines. But some bright spots. Shanghai Composite did add 0.6% thanks to chip makers and online game providers. Shenzhen Component, the second bourse, up 0.83%. Japanese factory output rose at a slower than expected pace in May as sweeping U.S. tariffs threatened to derail its already fragile economic recovery. According to the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, industrial output rose 0.5% in May from the previous month. That's less than the median forecasts of 3.5% rise. The ministry also flagged the worsening trend in sentiment. Manufacturers expect seasonally adjusted output to rise 0.3% in June and fall 0.7% in July. Tokyo is scrambling to get Washington to exempt its automakers from industry-specific tariffs of 25%. Japan also faces a 24% reciprocal tariff rate starting from July the 9th, unless it can negotiate a deal with the U.S. Motor vehicle production went up by 2.5% and shipments jumped 10.5% in May from the month before, as some manufacturers moved up their shipments because of the tariffs. Now, in an interview with Fox News, U.S. President Donald Trump accused Japan of engaging in unfair automobile trade. He says Tokyo should increase its imports of U.S. energy resources and other goods to help reduce Washington's trade deficit. U.S. trade tariffs also complicating a Bank of Japan's efforts to raise interest rates in order to tame inflation. According to a private think tank survey, Japanese households will get no respite from rising living costs. In fact, the number of food items that will cost more next month could jump 5-fold as compared to a year before. Based on a survey of some 200 major food makers, they expect to hike prices for about 2,100 items in July by an average of 15%. Aside from rising raw material prices and utility bills, companies also cited increasing transportation and labor costs. Prices are set to rise for a range of common items, including those made of rice as well as pasta sauce, chocolate, and even chewing gum. A rise in crude oil prices due to tensions in the Middle East could spell more trouble. The BOJ raised its short-term policy rate to 0.5% in January, but it has kept borrowing costs steady despite core consumer inflation hitting a two-year high of 3.7% in May. The central bank chief wants to hike rates when inflation is driven by more consumption and higher wages rather than rising raw material costs. Starbucks is reportedly looking to exit China as its market share falls amid stiff competition from low-cost domestic rivals. Caixin reports that the Seattle-based coffee chain has held talks with more than a dozen potential buyers, marking a shift from its earlier efforts to secure a strategic partner in China. Starbucks, however, would only say that it is not currently considering a full sale of its China operations, which make up roughly 9% of its global revenue. Starbucks' dominance in China's coffee market has fallen sharply in the last few years as local coffee chains like Luckin Coffee aggressively chip away at its share of the $22 billion industry. According to Euromonitor, Starbucks' market share fell to 14% last year from a high of 42% back in 2017, despite heavy investment. The competition also forced Starbucks to cut prices on some drinks, and that's the first time it's done so since opening its first store in China back in 1999. Now, for more, we have CNA's Tan Yuguan live from Shanghai to read the coffee grounds for us. Yuguan, good to have you on the show as always. Now, are lower-priced coffee competitors really to blame for Starbucks' troubles in China?
Well, Roland, I think it's quite undeniable that local rivals are undercutting Starbucks on price and convenience. Aside from good coffee, each brand also coming out with new flavors. And Starbucks is also contenting with more folks and offices owning their own gourmet coffee machines, as well as other caffeine peddlers, such as tea chain like Hey Tea and Chagi. Now, I approached some caffeinated folks near the biggest Starbucks in China, which is a stone's throw away from our bureau here, and here's what they have to say about Starbucks.
在上海的话，到处随处可见嘛，就比较方便。然后还有就是有的时候朋友聚会啊，或者说聊点事啊，就是星巴克会比较方便一些。
Sometimes I go out for coffee and I usually go Manner Coffee. With my recycling buck, I can get a nice decent coffee like within 5 or 10 yen. I think it is really I'm really satisfied with that. And the only chance I go to Starbucks, I think is that I go on a date.
There are so many brands or so many companies selling coffee here in China, and they are good. You offer seats and a nice environment. If you charge higher price, okay, but definitely Luckin is very aggressive. I can see that price-wise, and the taste is very good as well. Yeah, I like the coffee, the Americano with coconut.
So you see, for good coffee, the folks here have cheaper choices. But if they want a nice place to chit-chat over coffee, Starbucks still has a tiny niche over there. Even then, there are other independent cafes or small independent chains to contend with. So, which is why, despite having more stores, Starbucks revenue dropped from a peak of $3.7 billion to just $3 billion last year. Roland?
Yes, competition does sound very stiff. No, despite Starbucks' struggles, though, I'm hearing that China's coffee market is actually projected to continue to rise rapidly this year.
Yes, according to the 2025 China Urban Coffee Report, China's coffee industry grew 18% last year. The average cup per person also grew from under 17 cups in 2023 to over 22 cups in 2024. The report estimates that this statistic could reach 30 cups per person this year. But if you compare that to the United States, well, according to the U.S. National Coffee Association there, the average consumption of coffee is a whopping 729 cups. So in a way, you could say there's quite a bit of ground and potential growth in China here, especially in the lower tier cities. Roland?
But all that strong growth hasn't really made it any easier for the coffee chains themselves, be it local or foreign.
Yes, because the lower hanging fruits here in the first-tier cities have all been plucked. In fact, you take our neighborhood, for example, just 10 minutes walk from our bureau, there are at least 8 Starbucks outlets, 8 Manner Coffee outlets, that's a Shanghai chain here, and 5 Luckin Coffee outlets. And in the office building opposite us, there's 1 Starbucks, 1 Luckin, and 2 Manner Coffees in 1 office lobby. In the mall nearest to us, there are 2 Starbucks, just 2 minutes walking distance from each other, 3 Manner Coffees, and another on the way, and 2 Luckins opposite. It just goes to show you how keen the competition is here in Shanghai. Lower tier cities appear to be the new battleground as they become more developed. More people are adopting lifestyles from first tier cities. But while these cities offer virgin territory, they do have lower spending power that cannot compare with those of the first tier cities. And therefore, while they have powered the growth of chains like Luckin, it's hard to see how Starbucks can chase that same growth given its price point and lower spending power of the smaller cities. Starbucks would have to consider whether its capital can be better spent elsewhere in the world, chasing higher margins. Roland?
Yu Guan, appreciate that report. Stay caffeinated. That was Han Yu Guan live from Shanghai. Hong Kong's IPO market is roaring back after being in the doldrums the past 2 years. With investor demand surging and blockbuster deals like CATL, the Asian financial hub is moving closer towards reclaiming its global IPO crown. The companies have raised so far $13 billion this year, and consultants Deloitte reckons that total fundraising will hit $25.5 billion by year end. Now, earlier, I caught up with Hong Kong Exchanges and Clearing's CEO, Bonnie Chan, who's shared what's driving the pipeline and how she's positioning the exchange for pole position.
This year, we are seeing, I would say, a few clusters of listing applicant. Quite a big portion are these companies which have already listed in the mainland Chinese market, the A-share companies coming to Hong Kong for a second listing, a dual primary listings. And there are about, by now, close to 60 of them waiting in the pipeline. I think a big reason for them pursuing this A then H IPO is the fact that many of them have international ambitions. And so for them, having an offshore fundraising platform is particularly convenient. Also, many of them, given their international footprint, they will have employees all around the world, and therefore having Hong Kong listed stock as a form of remuneration, for their employees is also very attractive. And adding to that, the convenience of having Hong Kong listed stock as potentially an acquisition currency. So that is quite a vibrant pool of listing applicants. I would also say that there is now a return of interest quite strongly from investors around the world wanting to look at opportunities, especially in the mainland China and the rest of Asia. And I think we're benefiting from that.
CATL, the $4.6 billion IPO listing, brought back attention to the top-tier Chinese industries in terms of listing in Hong Kong. How is HKEX capitalizing on the surge of interest, from A share listing seeking a H share listing?
So actually, CATL, they exercised the green shoe, so it's $5.3 billion in total in terms of offering size. I think that's a very good example of what I mentioned earlier, A share listed companies coming to Hong Kong for a second listing in the form of an H share dual primary. Now, the reason is quite obvious. CATL has international footprint. And in fact, a very big portion of the money they raised through the Hong Kong listing will go to fund the building of a factory in Hungary. So I think this is very illustrative of the recent trend of this going out phenomena of a lot of these companies. CATL, actually, a few investors I spoke to mentioned two moments this year, the DeepSeek moment and then the CATL moment. And by that, they mean that CATL really is a very strong catalyst, which brought back a lot of investor attention to Chinese assets. I think a very well-recited fact is also the fact that CATL's H share price, so the Hong Kong listed share price, it's now trading at a premium to the A share price. Now, to me, that's symbolically quite important. It means that certainly they're benefiting from very strong interest from international investors.
There is still a 30-40% valuation gap between A shares and H shares, mainland Chinese companies listed in Hong Kong. Is this primarily a perception issue, do you think, or are there structural changes that HKEX can actually enact to close this gap?
So first of all, the gap is in fact closing, narrowing quite a bit recently. And if you ask me, the main reason why there is a discrepancy in terms of price, I think can be explained because those two pools of shares are actually not fungible. So basically, the price is set by a different price discovery mechanism altogether. I guess, we're very encouraged by the fact that we're seeing the H share price in general elevating in recent months.
More Chinese companies are walking away from U.S. listings because of administrative burdens and perceived political risks. How is Hong Kong positioning itself so that it is a credible long-term partner as opposed to being a listing alternative?
Well, I always say that Hong Kong listing can be very, very complementary, regardless of whether your first listing, it's in the mainland, like the Asia companies, or in the U.S. or elsewhere. One unique feature of the Hong Kong market is that we have an infrastructure called the Connect franchise, right? The Stock Connect program, which started in 2014, first beginning as a Connect program between Hong Kong and Shanghai, and then in 2016 extended to Hong Kong and Shenzhen. Now, the reason why this is very, very important is because of this mechanism, essentially any company, including international companies, listing in Hong Kong also benefit from southbound trading. And that is something which no other exchange can offer.
We've also seen overnight interest rates in Hong Kong fall significantly to almost near zero. in recent weeks. This is despite the Hong Kong dollar peg to the US dollar. Is this unusual monetary dislocation, is that a symptom of a deeper fragility in the market system, or is this just, surge in investor risk appetite?
Well, there are a lot of reasons, I think, to explain that phenomena. But suffice to say, we can also say that's because the demand for Hong Kong dollar is high, and I was often told that I'm part of the reason because of that very vibrant Hong Kong IPO market. I would say, in any event, the market has a way to adjust and find the new equilibrium. And I think, given that with the Hong Kong dollar is pegged to the US dollars, there's a way that the Hong Kong Monetary Authority can come in to make the necessary adjustments.
And you're up to date with the business news. Otelli.
Thanks so very much for that, Roland. Right, we're going to go for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, one of Hong Kong's last major opposition parties is disbanding 5 years after the national security law came into effect. We go into the city's political landscape with international and independent China strategist Andrew Leung. And China defends its envoys after foreign military intelligence accusing them of planning to do harm to a high-ranking Taiwanese official.
The weather.
This is East Asia tonight, and here are the headlines we've been following. China's manufacturing gets a boost from a fragile trade truce with the US, but is still far from recovery. Poor business sentiment keeping the pressure for more stimulus. China's top diplomat Wang Yi will soon be in talks with European leaders. His first stop in Brussels will be followed by visits to France and Germany. Ahead of that, Beijing warning against using China as a bargaining chip for a trade deal with the US. And Hong Kong has had its national security law in place for 5 years now. And now one more major opposition party is about to fold. And for more on that story, let's bring in Andrew Leung, international and independent China strategist, and he is speaking to us from Hong Kong. Well, thanks so much for joining us this evening, Andrew. So it really seems like the disbandment of the LSD is just, one more in the line, almost creating this domino effect. So, Andrew, from your perspective, is there any real space left for whether it's independent, political or civil society groups to actually operate in Hong Kong?
Well, I think that the whole thing must be looked at in proper perspective, because you look at what happened during the riots back in 2019 and 2020 that followed the so-called umbrella movement, and the umbrella movement happened in 2014, and trace it further back. You had the 2003 protest against Article 23, which is, of course, a provision in Hong Kong's basic law, Hong Kong's constitution. But then there was huge protest. Now that reflects a general misconception as to what this basic law is all about and what one country, two system actually means. Because a lot of the young people in Hong Kong, most of them do not have a very detailed knowledge about Chinese history. And then throughout their education, they'll be receiving education in mathematics, in law, in accountancy, the kind of subjects that would give them jobs, but not Chinese history. In the sense that most of the generation have lost the sense of nationhood. So they don't regard themselves as Chinese. They regard themselves as people born in Hong Kong. And now with the return of Hong Kong's sovereignty to the mainland, there's been a great deal of interaction between the two places. Previously, there was this mentality that the so-called phrase is called the well water doesn't mix with the river water, as if the two places could be entirely separated. But then with the two places increasingly intertwined economically, a free flow of people, ideas, goods. So that creates the kind of impact with the result that a lot of the people in Hong Kong felt that Hong Kong's identity was being eroded. And then, of course, came the elections for chief executive. And now look at the basic law, which is Hong Kong's constitution. That was included in the constitution a provision for election universal suffrage to elect the chief executive. Now that provision was not included in the joint declaration with Britain. It was China's initiative to include it in Hong Kong's basic law. But the condition must be that all the candidates must be pre-screened, because Beijing, of course, with this long separation with Hong Kong, all the candidates have to be pre-screened to be acceptable to Beijing, because the chief executive have got to work very closely with Beijing and got to be trusted by Beijing. Now, but this offer of universal suffrage to elect the chief executive was rejected by Hong Kong so-called Democrats.
So, Andrew, I just need to just sort of jump in here, right? Because I want to pick up on what these, these political parties, opposition parties are saying, that they're citing all this, they're saying there's tremendous political pressure. I mean, LSD citing that, but they couldn't really give more details. They didn't really say why. So what do you think are some of these unspoken pressures that are so intense that even a long-standing group like the LSD that has been around for 19 years feels forced to shut down?
Well, as I said, apart from this misunderstanding, that more into not only the riots, but separatist elements infiltrated this movement, and people and even flags waving, brazenly displaying slogans for Hong Kong's independence, that really rattled Beijing with the result of the introduction of the national security law. Now, of course, the national security law is not the most stringent in the world compared with similar laws enacted in the UK, of course, let alone that in the United States. It's reasonably lenient. But then that was, of course, a major shock. So Hong Kong had undergone all these periods of total misconception.
Yeah, so Andrew, I just want to talk about the people in Hong Kong generally feeling this pressure, right? We're hearing from residents basically on how this fear of uncertainty is actually reshaping life in the city. And let's just listen in to one particular resident.
I think Hong Kong people are now scared of unknown, which we are facing a new normal, a new Hong Kong that with many regulations, many ambiguous red lines, and many self-censoring things. So if they really scared of the NSL itself, I don't think so, because normal people have so little chance to face about NSL. But they are afraid of the unknown, that what they have now, the certainty in their life, would be taken very easy in a very short period.
So, Andrew, who we've just heard from there was actually a former district councillor. So where do you see the authorities drawing the line these days, right, between somebody just exercising their rights to speak or just assemble and something that they consider a threat to national security? I mean, how much of that line has moved in the last 5 years?
The red line must be national security, in the sense that challenging Beijing's sovereignty. For example, attacking the Communist Party or questioning the Beijing's rule over sovereignty over Hong Kong. These must be the red lines. But then ordinarily, criticisms of the Hong Kong government, it happens all over the place. Well, look at the other very popular Chinese newspaper, the Oriental Daily. The Oriental Daily thrives on criticisms of the government. Every day there is a new slogan criticizing some failings of the Hong Kong government in one way or the other. But that's okay. And then, of course, there is a great deal of misunderstanding as well among some business people. But then the confidence is coming back in a big way. For example, in June, just this month, according to the Fraser Institute, Hong Kong has regained the top slot in being the freest economy in the world. ahead of Singapore. And number 3 is Switzerland. And then also a lot of money going back to Hong Kong for the IPOs. And Hong Kong is now the city with the largest amount of IPOs ever. So that reflects the Hong Kong being a free economy.
So, Andrew, I hear what you're saying, that there is definitely the plus side, because the law has actually contributed to a more stable environment for businesses in Hong Kong, is what you're saying. But I just said, because we're short on time, just very quickly, since traditional forms of protest are increasingly impossible, what kind of resistance, if any, do you anticipate might emerge in this new environment in the future?
No, I think that Hong Kong should find its way forward, banking on the very good performance of Hong Kong's being recognized again as the freest economy, a lot of money coming in, and Hong Kong, after all, is the wealthiest city in terms of the ultra high net worth individuals. And I think that with the interaction with the Greater Bay Area and with the whole of Asia, with the whole the world economy is being upended, and there is a lot of money in interest, and European Union, for example, is recalibrating its relationship with Beijing, and including Hong Kong. And the United States is also trying to open up China. So I think that Hong Kong should find its own place. Now, this place is particularly highlighted by the recent establishment of being the headquarters of set up under the United Nations, the International Mediation Organization. It's a worldwide organization, but it's chosen to establish its headquarters in Hong Kong.
Right, I'm so afraid I have to cut you there, Andrew. We are running out of time. We'll certainly invite you back again for more of such conversations. Andrew Leung there, International and Independent China Strategist, live from Hong Kong. Now, in other news, China has defended its diplomats after Taiwan accused Chinese embassy staff of planning to ram the vice president's car during an official visit to the Czech Republic in March last year. The Chinese Foreign Ministry today stressed that its diplomats respect their host country's laws and regulations, adding that Taiwan is a part of China and has no so-called vice president. Taiwan's Vice President Hsiao Bi-khim said on Sunday that she would not be intimidated from voicing Taipei's interests abroad. She also said that the island will not be isolated by intimidation. Ms. Hsiao's reaction follows a Czech military intelligence report released on Friday that Chinese diplomats, as well as the Secret Service, had followed Ms. Hsiao and had planned to intimidate her physically while she was visiting the country. Well, China views Taiwan as its own and has regularly accused the island's ruling party of seeking independence. A UN conference on development financing in Spain begins today to rally fresh support for development aid following US-led funding cuts. Now, the conference will be the largest of such talks in a decade as the UN tries to safeguard the ongoing fight against poverty. At least 50 world leaders, including EU chief Ursula von der Leyen and UN head Antonio Guterres, are in Seville for the 4-day conference. But key player Washington is snubbing those talks. It had withdrawn over what it said was the crossing of several red lines, and that includes the push to triple development bank lending, changing tax rules, and using the term gender in summit wording. Expectations are increasing for China to take a bigger role, with Washington seen to be stepping away from its traditional aid donor role. Beijing, for example, has funded aid projects in Cambodia after the USAID pulled out, with initiatives appearing to align with the development goals of the terminated US-led projects. The UN says there is currently a $4 trillion financing gap, which it says hinders progress towards its sustainable development goals. International charity Oxfam says that current development aid cuts are the largest in 65 years. The Trump administration significantly slashed its foreign aid by more than 80%. It used to be the UN's largest donor. But the foreign aid cuts have forced the organization to reduce aid by a third. The conference will revolve around measures to close the $1 trillion a year funding gap. That includes tripling multilateral lending capacity, debt relief, pushing to boost tax-to-GDP ratios to at least 15%, and shifting special IMF money to countries that need it most. Now, coming up next on East Asia tonight, floods ease in China's southern and southwestern regions, but more rains are expected in the coming days. Rescue and relief efforts are in full swing in provinces along China's south and southwest since the weekend after heavy rain triggered widespread flooding. Although the waters are now receding, authorities are warning of even more rainfall in the coming days. Now, sludge cleanup work began after water levels of the Tuliu River in Guangxi province receded to below warning levels. At the peak of the flood, some 40 ferry crossings had to be halted. Over in Guizhou province, the flood emergency response has been raised to the highest level after floods struck on Saturday. Firefighters were deployed to waterlogged areas to pull out trapped cars and evacuate the stranded. Over in Sichuan province, weather authorities have also raised the alert after heavy rain is forecast to hit 16 cities. Nearly 30,000 people have been evacuated as a precaution. China's rainy season typically stretches from May to September, and that can vary based on the region. Torrential rains and flooding often send thousands of tons of waste on land flowing into the rivers. Wushan, for example, a county situated in southwestern China along the Yangtze River, is pulling out all the stops to ensure rubbish and pollution on the river are kept to a minimum. China has been implementing measures to protect the river, which is the country's longest and a major economic belt. Officials want to restore ecosystems and ensure that development remains sustainable.
我们的水实时的对它进行监测，那么监测之后，感官的这些感知系统好，所有的数据到我们的一个整个中心嘛，它一个运算，比如说发现什么异常。发现异常之后，直接从我们的系统里边交办给你比如说你乌山或者是红姐哪个区县出现了什么异常，直接交办给区县人民政府。
Previously, the collected waste would have gone straight to landfills, but today, some 4,500 tons of domestic waste are incinerated daily, and in the process, generate energy for the local power grid.
以前，重庆的垃圾可能是大量的用填埋的方式，对填埋来说，它可能还是会有一些隐患的。好，现在所有的垃圾都实现了零填埋了，都送到焚烧厂来焚烧，它能最大限度的减量化、资源化利用。
While officials acknowledged concerns over pollutants caused by the burning, they say technology have been applied to the process to minimize emissions. Japan returned 4 giant pandas to China over the weekend ahead of the expiration of a joint conservation project contract. A chartered plane carrying Rohin and her 3 Japan-born daughters landed in Chengdu in Sichuan province late Saturday before being transported to a panda research center. They were accompanied by Chinese and Japanese experts throughout the flight who saw to their safety and comfort. The two sides have worked closely in the last 3 decades, jointly breeding 17 panda cubs, and have achieved progress in conservation efforts, care and disease treatment, as well as on public education. On Saturday, panda fans caught a glimpse of the 4 pandas for one last time before they departed the Adventure World Amusement Park in Wakayama Prefecture.
寂しいんですけれども、元気な姿を見れて嬉しいですし、行ってらっしゃいっていう思いで、今日最後までみんなの元気な姿見れたらなって思います。
向こうに行ってまた今後生徒で健康に末永く元気に過ごして向こうのまた中国の方、そして日本から行かれる方にまた元気な姿を見せてもらいたいなと思ってます。
Here's a question for you. Would you buy a home where someone has died? Well, in Japan, where property prices are soaring, such homes are actually becoming more popular. For this story, though, a viewer discretion is advised, as some images may be disturbing.
This is professional cleaner Tatsumasa Morikagi. Right now, he's cleaning up an apartment where an elderly man has died, undiscovered for more than 6 months.
最初の頃はやっぱり匂いとかで結構鼻や喉に来てたんですけど、最近はもうそれが慣れてきた感じですね。
Properties like this are known in Japan as jikobuken, or stigmatized homes, places where deaths, including murders or even suicides, have occurred. Most are from socially isolated deaths, where occupants pass away alone and are not found for some time. Such cases often require specialized cleaning or even renovations, like replacing floors and wallpaper. Due to the history, these homes often sell at a discount. This particular house is priced about 20% lower because of its past and will be renovated before it's sold. Japan's cultural beliefs also shape how these properties are viewed.
In Shinto, many people believe that the soul of a dead person can stay at the place where the person died. And if the person died peacefully, it won't be any problem. But in the case of tragic death, the soul is believed to become a ghost.
That fear has spawned a unique business. That's the so-called ghost investigation services. Property consultant and paranormal investigator Katsutoshi Kodama spends nights conducting thorough surveys to certify whether a home has paranormal activity.
私がその現場に夜10時から朝6時まで滞在して映像、音声、あと電池化ですね、あと温度、室温と湿度と大気圧、あとサーモグラフィーの温度を確認しながら騒音を調査することによってその部屋に何もありませんということを証明するためにそういう調査をしています。
The house he's currently working on has a grim history, a suicide 7 years ago, and an isolated death last year. But he believes the property can still find a buyer.
価値がやっぱり上がっているので、物件を持ちたいで、買うにしても安く仕入れたいっていう気持ちがあるので、そこに一つ自己物件っていう選択肢が出てきているのかなというふうには思います。
やはり投資家としては安く買えるという部分もありますし、ご自身で住むわけではないので気にしないというところで、取引されるような方がいます。
With an increasingly aging population, these affected properties are becoming more common in Japan. Government data shows nearly 22,000 deaths last year went undiscovered for more than a week. This means the market for these homes and the specialists who manage them is expanding.
I hope you've enjoyed Monday's edition of East Asia tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia, and you can look us up on Facebook and YouTube as well. Have a good evening.
The weather